James Stewart. Before he was the charming everyman of Hollywood, James Stewart was a warrior. At the height of his fame, Stewart didn't hide behind celebrity. He volunteered for World War II, the first major movie star to enlist. He didn't serve in comfort or as a poster boy. Stewart was a combat pilot in the U.S. Army Air Forces. He flew over 20 dangerous bombing missions over Nazi Germany. His leadership and courage earned him the Distinguished Flying Cross twice. But war left its mark. When Stewart returned to Hollywood, he was different. Behind his kind eyes and calm voice lay the heavy burden of combat trauma. He rarely spoke about his time at war, even when asked. Hollywood moved on. Stewart kept flying in secret, haunted, private, but deeply proud. While Tinseltown remembered his Oscars and iconic roles, they tried to forget the soldier he became. But make no mistake, James Stewart wasn't just a star. He was a real-life hero, forged in war and forgotten by fame. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was the undisputed king of Hollywood, suave, commanding, the face of American cinema. But when tragedy struck and his wife, Carol Lombard, died in a plane crash while supporting the war effort, Gable made a decision that stunned the world. At 41, well beyond the draft age, he enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. Gable flew 5 combat missions over Nazi-occupied Europe as a gunner and documentarian. Enemy fire ripped through his plane multiple times, and there was a bounty placed on his head by Hitler himself, dead or alive. Hollywood grew nervous. They tried to keep Gable out of danger, but he refused safety. His war footage was used to train gunners, and he earned the Air Medal and Distinguished Flying Cross. After the war, Gable returned to the screen, but something had changed. The sparkle was dimmed, the bravado now grounded in real loss. Hollywood wanted to remember the playboy, not the soldier. But Clark Gable left his mark not just on film, but on the battlefield. Charles Bronson. Before Charles Bronson became the gritty face of cinematic justice, he was a child of poverty, one of 15 siblings, raised in a Pennsylvania coal mining town. But it was World War II that forged the hardened edge we saw on screen. Bronson served as an aerial gunner in the U.S. Army Air Forces, flying over 25 combat missions in a B-29 bomber in the Pacific. Facing relentless enemy fire, he manned the skies with death always near. He earned a Purple Heart for wounds sustained during combat, a reminder that his tough guy image was no act. After the war, Bronson quietly transitioned to acting, rarely discussing his service. Hollywood loved his stoic presence, but often ignored his past. The man who battled death above the clouds was now typecast as a silent avenger. The world remembered his on-screen toughness, but forgot the real-life warrior behind it. Charles Bronson didn't need to play a hero, he'd already been one. While Hollywood tried to bury the truth in scripts and shadows, his story lives on in silence and scars. Paul Newman. With his piercing blue eyes and effortless charm, Paul Newman became one of Hollywood's most beloved icons. But long before the fame, before the Oscars and racing trophies, Newman wore a Navy uniform in World War II. He had dreams of becoming a pilot, but fate had other plans. Colorblindness grounded him. Instead, he served as a radioman and gunner aboard torpedo bombers in the Pacific. He was part of a unit that supported deadly missions during the Battle of Okinawa, one of the bloodiest conflicts in the war. Just before one mission, his pilot got sick, a twist of fate that saved Newman's life, as the plane he was supposed to fly in was shot down. Newman returned from the war quietly, never boasting about the service that shaped him. Hollywood embraced his charisma but glossed over the soldier within. They sold him as a sex symbol, not a survivor. But behind every cool smirk was a man who'd seen war, who'd dodged death, and who never forgot it. Hollywood may have tried to forget, but Paul Newman never did. Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin was the tough guy of Hollywood, rugged voice, cold stare, no-nonsense attitude. But that hardness wasn't just acting. It was earned in blood during World War II. At just 18, Marvin enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps and found himself fighting in one of the war's most brutal battles, Saipan. Shot in the buttocks and foot, he nearly died on the battlefield. He spent over a year recovering, bearing shrapnel in his body for the rest of his life. Marvin was awarded the Purple Heart, but he rarely talked about it. When he returned, Hollywood cast him as the very thing he had once been: soldiers, killers, rebels. They loved the persona, but few knew it came from real pain, real loss. Marvin carried the ghosts of war into every performance. You could see it in his eyes, that cold truth only a combat vet could wear. Hollywood embraced the image but left the man behind. They sold him as fiction. But Lee Marvin was the real deal, a Marine turned actor, whose battlefield never really ended. Tony Curtis. Before Tony Curtis lit up the silver screen with charm, swagger, and leading man looks, he was just Bernard Schwartz, a kid from the Bronx who chose war over stardom. At age 17, Curtis joined the U.S. Navy during World War II, inspired by the attack on Pearl Harbor. He served aboard the USS Proteus, a submarine tender, in the Pacific Theater. His ship was present in Tokyo Bay during the surrender of Japan, a historic moment most actors only read about. Curtis spent his nights on deck, scanning for enemy threats, and dreaming of the Hollywood lights he might one day chase. That boy in uniform became a box office sensation. But Hollywood preferred to market him as a heartthrob, not a war veteran. They sold fantasies, not his truth. Few fans knew that before he played roles like Houdini or the handsome rogue, he stood watch in waters filled with danger. Tony Curtis wore his service quietly, with pride but without spotlight. He survived the war, transformed himself, and conquered Hollywood, even if Hollywood chose to forget where his story really began. Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda was already a star when the world went to war. With hits like The Grapes of Wrath under his belt, he could have stayed in Hollywood, basking in fame. But Fonda wasn't wired that way. At age 37, he walked away from the spotlight and enlisted in the U.S. Navy, not for show, but for duty. He served as a quartermaster aboard the USS Satterley, a destroyer supporting Allied invasions across Europe. Later, he was transferred to Air Combat Intelligence and worked behind the scenes on high-risk missions in the Pacific. He earned the Bronze Star for his service. Fonda wasn't one to brag. He returned to acting quietly, carrying the weight of war behind his calm, commanding presence. Hollywood continued casting him as the moral compass of America, but they rarely mentioned the real-life hero behind the roles. They sold him as the ideal man, not the sailor who earned it. While the red carpets rolled on, Henry Fonda's war faded from memory. But beneath every line he delivered was a man who'd fought and never forgot. Jack Palance. Before Jack Palance terrified audiences with his chiseled face and menacing glare, he was a bomber pilot staring death in the eyes over enemy skies. Born Volodymyr Polonuk, the son of Ukrainian immigrants, he joined the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II. As a B-24 bomber co-pilot, he flew dangerous missions over Europe. But one training flight went horribly wrong. His aircraft caught fire midair, forcing Palance to bail out. The crash left him with severe facial injuries and reconstructive surgery, the very features that would later make him unforgettable in Hollywood. But while Tinseltown loved his rugged looks and intense presence, it rarely mentioned the real story behind them. They cast him as the villain, the outlaw, the killer, never the soldier. Palance didn't parade his past. He let the silence speak for itself. Every performance carried the weight of what he'd survived. While Hollywood molded him into a monster for the screen, they chose to forget the hero behind the scars. But Jack Palance's war wasn't fiction. It was lived, endured, and etched into history. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas was the face of strength in post-war Hollywood, bold jawline, fiery eyes, and unshakable intensity. But before Spartacus made him immortal, Douglas was just a struggling young man named Isser Danielovich, the son of poor Jewish immigrants. When World War II erupted, he didn't hesitate. He joined the U.S. Navy. Serving as a communications officer aboard anti-submarine patrol ships, Douglas faced the harsh reality of war head-on in the treacherous North Atlantic. After suffering injuries from an accidental depth charge explosion, he was honorably discharged in 1944. Douglas rarely spoke of his military service, not out of shame, but humility. Hollywood adored his commanding presence, but often overlooked the soldier who served with purpose. They crafted a legend around his roles, not his reality. While audiences saw a gladiator, a cowboy, a fighter on screen, the real battle-hardened man had already fought his war in silence. The uniform may have been traded for costumes, but the warrior never left. Kirk Douglas was a star forged in steel and wartime sacrifice, long before the cameras rolled. Telly Savalas. Before Telly Savalas became the lollipop-sucking detective Kojak, he was a soldier with a steel will and a shaved head that would become iconic. Born to Greek immigrant parents, Savalas wasn't handed success. He earned it the hard way. During World War II, he served in the U.S. Army as a corporal, stationed in North Africa and Europe. His role was in medical support, but make no mistake, war left its imprint on him. He saw pain, loss, and endurance up close, shaping the no-nonsense persona that would later dominate his roles. After the war, Savalas used the GI Bill to pursue broadcasting, which led him to acting. Hollywood embraced his tough guy image, but never highlighted the quiet years he spent in uniform, helping save lives instead of taking them. His bold voice and bald head stole the spotlight, but behind that was a veteran who'd already served with honor. Hollywood loved Telly the star, but it often forgot Telly the soldier. He didn't need a script to prove his grit. The battlefield had already written his story.